This lesson, I want to work on setting up some more of our routes because it's important to have all of them set up and functioning before we try to use them within the front end code. So the next one that I want to set up is I want to be able to go to users, and instead of get sent, I want to output all of the user information. So this one is a really easy one because we've got some great functionality already built in to Express where we can grab that data and simply output it within a JSON format. So now when I go over to the web page with that particular route, I get all of that user information. And one thing I did want to note is because we are using an object here, so this has a static value, and every time we restart the server, then we default back to this original value. And this is another great use case for using a database instead of just a data object, but this is for demonstration purposes in order to get comfortable how it all works before we try to set up a database and hook that into here. I want to have a data object that we can use and we can actually see visibly what's happening. So just keep that in mind, and obviously if you are using a database, then all of this data will be persistent, but because this is an object here that we're using every time we restart the server, we lose all of the updates into that data object. So just keep that in mind as we're working through the upcoming lessons. So the next route that we should also look at, so we looked at post, so we've got post working, clean that up a little bit of course. And we can get rid of these console logs as well. And next, let's look at get users. So we want to get the user by ID. So next, let's look at getting back just the one user's information. We see that they all should have unique IDs. And again, we are simulating a database. So if we go to users/1, we're passing in the ID of 1. So if we look over here, we see that ID is being recognized, and we're ready to use that in order to search through our data and return back whatever one of the users has the ID that matches the parameter. So let's build out a function. And we'll just call it getRow. We'll pass in the parameter of ID. And this function is actually going to look through all of the rows, so it's going to loop through all of the data users. So data users. And it's going to check to see if, and we'll do a condition here, if item ID, so this is that ID value that we're passing in, is equal to the ID value that we are passing in, or that's item ID is the one we're looking for. Then what we'll do is we'll return back that item information. So we're going to return back that whole row, and if nothing else happens, then what we'll do is we'll return back false. So now we can use that function information. Let's clean up some of this console log stuff as well. So we know that we're passing in a parameter. So let's send that over and we'll call it getRow, or we can actually just simply output it. That's probably the easiest thing to do. And let's save that, refresh, and see what happens. So we get false. So let's refresh, and we see that we're getting returned back false. Remember before, when we go into the console, we actually see it being passed as ID. So in order to get the ID out of the parameters, we need to specify that we want to pass in the ID. So now we see that once we pass in the ID, we get a match and we can return back that user information. So this route now is set up as well. And again, we are simulating a database. So typically a database might have different ways that you could query and you could return back these values. So this is just because we are working with the data object. So things are a little bit different, but it gives us the ability to kind of use this as our database so we can visually see everything that's happening. In the next lesson, we are going to be finishing up this RESTful API and looking at put and delete. So that's coming up next.